Let's kick it around.
Let her rip.
Beckham.
Mark Rogers, TV talking Ohio State football. And just about the best way to do it that I can think of is to bring in Claire Crawford from the ozone.net and her show with Joe Dexter. Oh, hell no. Claire, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing so well. Well, I could be better, and I'm sure you know why.
Well, we will talk about how you could be doing better, although I don't think it's correctable this year.
I agree.
But we'll do what we can. We'll let you vent. It's cathartic. Let it all out. Give us your best or your worst. It might be your worst.
I've been holding this in. I'm ready.
Ohio State beats Wisconsin to win the Big Ten championship, 27-21. That game can be interpreted a number of ways. According to the College Football Playoff Committee, Ohio State beat the fourth best team in the country because they're selecting the best teams. So they rank them 1 through 25 as the best through the 25th best. So Wisconsin was the fourth best team in the country entering that game. Ohio State won at 27-21. It was close in score and in situation at the end, but I think if you watch the games and evaluate the play, Ohio State was clearly the better team. Decidedly, they made some egregious mistakes that kept Wisconsin close, but Ohio State won the game and is the Big Ten champion. Champions being a selection of the College Football Playoff Committee upon the launch of this system in 2014 that was just about everything. You have to win a championship. This is key in the formula. Well, that's deteriorated as well. So what was your reaction? I could only imagine, Claire, if we had a camera on you when the logos were unveiled, 1 through 3 were obvious, and then Alabama all over your TV screen.
So I actually this is going to be a real shocker to those who follow me and know me. I was at the gym at the time because they've got this whole row of TVs, and I'm nervously just jumping rope like a boxer getting ready for a fight. And I'm watching it unfold, and I just have this sinking pit in my stomach. I had a feeling they would not get it right again. And there was a part of me that had almost made peace with it, or I thought had made peace with it on November 4th in Iowa City. That the chances of the Buckeyes now going on, and I think the part of me that made peace of it was a part of me that thought if they can lose to Iowa in the fashion that they did, they can give up 55 points to Iowa, that there is not a chance they can go through the remainder of their schedule unscathed. There is not a chance that they can get to the Big Ten championship, not a chance that they can win it. So that's the part of me that made peace with Ohio State not making the playoffs. And the part of me that existed started to fritter away when my hopes were, being raised through the rest of the season when we're watching them obliterate Michigan State and the comeback against Penn State and just do exactly what they were supposed to do. They were in the driver's seat. They were supposed to take care of business. They did. I was not one of those people that thought that they were going to have to win to Wisconsin or beat Wisconsin in a convincing fashion in order to get the nod. The other mistake that the committee made, amongst many, were ranking Wisconsin 6th. If they didn't believe that Wisconsin was a good enough team for Ohio State to have beaten, if they didn't believe that that should have been valued very, very high on Ohio State's resume, then why did they only bump them down to 6, 2 spots? That was my real question. I think that was one major hiccup. The other major hiccup was, the other major hiccup, I think, was the committee not releasing any sort of standard to say why they thought Alabama was better. They just said, eye test, Alabama's the better team. Because there is no standard. There's nothing to say that Alabama is a better team on paper than Ohio State. And that's the real problem I had with it. If anybody has beef, Wisconsin has beef that they couldn't have gotten. They're a one-loss team to a very good Ohio State team, 5th in the nation, in a conference championship. I don't know why Wisconsin fans are not waving their flags. USC. I mean, we've talked about that multiple times. I'm befuddled.
So let's connect some dots, because you've said a few really good ones up here. One would be that Wisconsin started the day 4th in the country. They only dropped to 6th. Auburn started the day number 2 in the country. They dropped to 7th. So Auburn dropped to 7th after losing to Georgia in the SEC championship game. So a team that made the Final Four at number 3. So is the committee valuing Ohio State above Georgia? They dropped Wisconsin only 2 spots for losing to Ohio State. They dropped Auburn from 2 to 7 for losing to Georgia. Usually you get, if there's credit to be gained for a loss, more credit when you're losing to a better team than if, of course, you lose to a lesser team, you plummet further down the standings. So they are telling us that they value Ohio State more than Georgia. It's kind of odd.
The other portion that I don't understand by that logic, and I don't, before I say this, I don't want Clemson fans to jump all over me, because I do believe that Clemson should be in that top 4. I don't think there's any disputing that. However, Clemson is an example of the committee not devaluing a loss to a lesser opponent when they lost to Syracuse and didn't drop. It was October, mid-October. They didn't drop substantially in the polls. Now, it wasn't exactly the blowout that happened in Iowa City, and they were technically without their quarterback for a part of the game. I still don't give them a huge pass, as much of a pass as the committee gave them, but it flies in the face of the idea of not who you beat, but who beat you. Was not one of, apparently it wasn't one of the criteria of the selection committee.
Yeah, so Wisconsin lost to Ohio State, their first loss of the season, versus 12 wins. They dropped from 4 to 6. And as you mentioned, to compare Wisconsin's resume versus Alabama's, tearing the logo off the side of the helmet, they seem very comparable. They seem very comparable because Wisconsin's best wins were against Michigan, Northwestern, and Iowa, that are pretty favorable, comparable to Mississippi State and LSU and Texas A&M. A lot of 8-4 and 7-5 there. And then Wisconsin's loss turned out to be just a 6-point loss to what turned out to be the 5th-ranked team in the country, versus Alabama losing to what turned out to be the 7th-ranked team in the country and losing by 2 touchdowns.
None of it is making sense. And we can't, we can't yell that this is some weird, they're doing this for the ratings, or because Ohio State fills more seats. Ohio State turns on more televisions. Ohio State engages in more streaming in Columbus and Ohio State's market than almost all of college football. So you can't say that they picked Bama for ratings. Now, Birmingham gets good ratings. Alabama gets good ratings. I do understand that. But if you're pitting one against another, it's not like Ohio State was UCF, which they technically are slighted as well. So what I don't understand, I still have yet to connect the dots. I still have yet to do it. And I've said, speaking of strength of schedule, I said it on Twitter the other day, and it was kind of a flip comment, but I think we're going to see a shift. And the real winners here are the Mercers of the world, are the Appalachian states of the world, the Youngstown states of the world, the Sisters of the Poor, the 4-H Club, that all of these teams, all of these Power 5 conference teams are now going to be scheduling, because apparently just do your business. Just beat Mercer, just beat the Cupcake, look decent doing it, have a really good logo on your helmet, and you're in. No big deal. Why schedule the home and home with Oklahoma? Why schedule a home and home with Texas? Get it off the schedule, because it doesn't mean anything.
What's funny about all this as well is that the Iron Bowl, a game that's steeped in tradition, arguably the greatest tradition in college football, some would say, it turned out to be meaningless, or if anything, it was counterproductive. It allowed Alabama to stay home and not risk losing a game against the top team and secure a playoff spot. And it gave Auburn the opportunity to go and lose its playoff spot. So it was more advantageous to lose the last game of the season for Alabama than it was for Auburn to win it.
And before I get accused of waving my Buckeye flag here and having sour grapes, Ohio State was to their advantage the previous year. And we loved it, as Ohio State fans, we loved to see them get into the playoff. But you could argue the same thing, not that it was the same team, but definitely they had the advantage of not playing in the Big Ten championship game, playing one less game, having another week to rest up, and going into the playoff. They didn't do well. Obviously, they got blown out by Clemson, and Penn State ended up going to their bowl game and losing, but a much closer game, a much better game, probably a more deserving team. So, and I don't want to get caught up in the comparison between Ohio State in 2016 and Alabama this year, because Ohio State's strength of schedule still far eclipses Alabama's schedule this year. So it's not exactly the same, but it definitely, as far as not playing in the championship game, it is.
So everybody draws the comparison that you just drew to a certain extent, but then separated from, because you should, because a one-loss team was selected over a two-loss team in both situations, and a non-conference champion with definitely a better resume in 2016, but not a better resume in 2017, was selected over a conference champion. The differences that I'll make right here: Alabama does not have the resume that Ohio State has this year, nor did it have last year, because Ohio State beat a top 10 Michigan and Wisconsin and a top 5 at the finish Oklahoma team. Alabama does not have that on its resume. And if you're looking at conference representation, Penn State fans have every right to be upset about what happened last year. And I was right on here ranting and raving that Penn State should have been selected as the Big Ten champion. But I understood the selection of Ohio State. It made sense if you're looking at overall resume. The Penn State selection I campaigned for, but I understood the Ohio State selection last year. This year, Alabama does not have that resume. Plus, if again, what I was getting to, if you're looking for conference representation, there is no representation for the Big Ten this year. It might have been misplaced last year, but at least there was representation for the Big Ten. There is no representation for the Big Ten. Instead, we've got a 50% SEC field. And I think that is one thing that is key in all this, is that the reason we have conferences that play in different areas of the country is to provide them with representation. So we can only draw so much conclusion of a team's value based on their season, because they play their 8 or 9 conference games, they play a cream puff or 2, and then they play their one, hopefully they play their one Oklahoma, Texas, USC, whoever it is out of conference. But that's the only little slice of intersectional, cross-sectional competition that we see. Otherwise, we don't know. Therefore, that's why we're giving the Pac-12 representation and the Big 12 and the every area, because we really don't know. They're playing within their silo all season. So give them representation.
So the other part that happens when this kind of stuff happens is not only does it highlight the flaws in the current system, but it allows the folks that want to put their tinfoil hat on to come up with conspiracy theories about, conference Pangea ahead of us, these mega conferences that could happen, and the case for that. It allows people to assume that there's an SEC bias for those who are broadcasting the games. It allows for people to wonder what the criteria is on the committee and what they're actually hiding and who is on this committee and the hard part is, as an Ohio State fan, like you mentioned, my reaction when I saw this selection, my joy of watching my team, because I've been a college football fan for many, many, many years. I'm not someone that just started magically yesterday following college football. I've been following college football my entire life. I've been a fan my entire life. The Big Ten championship has been a big deal my entire life. It's still a big deal to Urban Meyer. It's still a big deal for their goals. And I had such joy watching them with their football and their fireworks and confetti and just watching them celebrate as a team that's been through so much and has fought so hard. The joy was immediately erased. And not because of that the Ohio State didn't make the playoff, but who actually did. And that's the hard part for me to swallow, is that I didn't have any real cushion for me to be able to enjoy. And there were people who texted me saying, "Oh, I'm sorry about Ohio State." You know what? I'm not though. I'm still wanting to celebrate Ohio State's Big Ten victory. And this is not a concession for the playoffs. This is something that I would like to enjoy and celebrate, and I would like for the team to be able to do so as well.
So would you feel the same way if USC would have been selected?
I don't think so. I can't say for sure. I don't think so, and it's only because at least it was from a different conference. Is that we had 4 conferences at least at that point having been represented instead of 2 from one conference, and that would probably be the only real. I mean, obviously, I still would want Ohio State to win it, but that would be the only thing that would make me feel better over Alabama being chosen.
Like you just stated, I can't come up with a conclusion of what the committee's motivation was. I have to think that if I'm going to trust it to some degree, their integrity, which I think can be called into question at this point, but I've trusted it to a certain extent through the first 3 years because they haven't always made the decision that I would have made, the one I cited in 2016, but I trusted their judgment, and I thought that they at least had some reasonable explanation for what they did. And now I just think that they selected the team that they think is the best team. I think that that's the only conclusion I can come to because, again, as you mentioned, it wasn't a decision between Alabama and Central Florida or Alabama and TCU in terms of brand name and eyeballs on the TV screens. And if anything, they are going to negate a certain portion of the country. The hardcore college football fans are going to watch, but a lot of people are going to tune out when there's not equal representation across the country. That's already been proven in the TV ratings for the first 3 years, that when there was more diversity out there, that the ratings were better.
As they should be. And you're right that the reason that you feel that way is because that's what they're telling us. That's what the committee, anyone that's represented the committee, has come out and said, our job is to get the 4 best teams on the field at all times. And they thought that Alabama was just a better team. Well, show me how. That's what I want to know. I want to know how you reached to the point. I want to know what made you decide that Alabama was the better team. And I've heard, other, again, like conspiracy theorists and the talking heads like you and I say, well, do you think that Alabama would have gone in and lost to Iowa uh, and given up 55 points? There's no way to have known that. There's absolutely no way to have known that.
Yeah, the only
Unfortunately,
thing we know is what the results were for 12 games for each team or 13 games for Ohio State. And so all we know is that Ohio State lost a bad game at Iowa. They lost by 2 scores to Oklahoma, but they're arguably the best team in the country. And Alabama lost by 2 scores to Auburn. And so Alabama would have, in my estimation, I think it's pretty clear if all they did was play 2 games and 1 game, and that was the season. Alabama played 1 game and Ohio State played 2 games, that Alabama has a much better resume.
right.
Oh, let's add the 11 wins and the 11 wins, and now it's a completely different resume because you beat 2 of the. What's funny is they're not just considered 2 of the 10 best teams in the country, but according to the own college football playoff committee rankings that they built, they're saying you beat 2 of the best 9 teams in the country.
The other
Not
thing
somebody
that,
else's rankings.
right. The other thing that I'm calling into question right now is we've seen this happen in previous iterations of, determining the national championship with the BCS and before the BCS, that the preseason rankings and then the initial rankings sometimes end up meaningful to the selection committee. So because Alabama, and they've actually said this as well, because Alabama had been ranked so high all year, they had trouble knocking them down. Right. What does that mean? You're the one that came up with this arbitrary number as to where they should be ranked in the beginning of the season anyway.
And this is
It,
the same committee that says each and every week they tear up everything and they build it from scratch.
Not a chance. And then, I listen to others. Obviously, I follow a lot of sports and a lot of folks who talk college football, including yourself, that said, well, we recreated this with the computers that would have done the BCS and the AP poll instead of the Harris poll, since the Harris poll doesn't exist anymore. And we came up with the same exact 4 teams. Duh, it didn't work with the BCS either. And the AP poll is still humans' opinion. By the way, as much respect as I have for the Associated Press, it's like the coaches poll. They can't watch every game. They can't put their eyes to every single team. So there are going to be regional biases, and there are going to be teams that they don't get to see. I'm obviously a huge college football fan, but I will admittedly say I've had to put extra time and effort into studying what USC has been doing all season. Even though I've caught a few games here and there, I watch Mark Rogers TV. I listen to the radio. Little plug there. But I will admit that I still didn't know some really fine details about USC. And I obviously follow college football really closely. So there's no way. There's no way that it just gets ripped up and started all over again.
Claire, one of the funny arguments to me is that I've heard a number of people use Vegas as a justification for Bama's selection, that Bama would be a favorite and will be a favorite in the 2 games that they possibly play in the playoff and would be against Ohio State. So it's justification because Vegas knows best and they say Bama would be the favorite. What's strange about that, let's backtrack a little bit here. In 2014, ironically, the 2 same teams actually played, the same 2 programs actually played. And Alabama, out of Vegas's wisdom, was a 10-point favorite in that game, but they didn't win the game.
85 yards through the heart of the South. That's
Alabama was also a touchdown favorite against Clemson last year in the national championship game, and they didn't win. On top of that, and I'm going to run the numbers, Claire, I'm going to beat myself up and actually go through this because I've got a list of videos I'm going to cut here concerning playoff college football criteria and so forth. I'm going to guarantee, I'm going to go through my little notebook of my predictions here against the Vegas line. Okay, let's throw out all the ridiculous Ohio State, Rutgers kind of matchups, talking about like seeded games, because that's all we're going to have in a playoff scenario. I guarantee that Vegas's favorite lost 35 to 40% of the time. So Vegas cannot properly predict at any high rate of return who's going to win a like seeded game in college football. But they're to be trusted to prophesy, to predict who's going to win matchups in the future. Then we shouldn't even play the games if that's the
Right.
case.
Right.
We wouldn't even need to play.
I don't know if people know how Vegas works, but they are trying to get your money. They put the information like that out there, so you will place your money on the table for them to swoop up and take away. It's very profitable. It's a very profitable business, college football, and it's not something that we should be measuring one team's talent versus another by any stretch of the imagination. Ohio State was favored to beat Iowa. That I mean, if we really want to make those comparisons, that's obviously that no one predicted that blowout happening.
Ohio State was favored to beat Oklahoma.
Right.
Now, I have no argument with anyone who wants to tell me that they truly think that Alabama's one of the 4 best teams, or even the best team in the country. We all have our opinion, but I don't want to base a process on opinion. I don't want to base it solely on opinion. Sure, there has to be interpretation of the results and interpretation of the metrics. That comes into play, of course. But this is who I think. I had somebody that I actually know, but also they tweeted at me. They said, okay, Mark, look me in the avatar and you tell me that you think Ohio State would beat Alabama. And I said, you are proving my point. This is how you're proving my point, by just asking me this question. It shouldn't matter what I think, and it shouldn't matter what they think. 3 top 10 wins or 3 top 15 wins versus 0, and all the other things that we've discussed over the last few weeks, the resumes aren't comparable. I'm not saying Alabama's not a better team, because none of us are deity. None of us know who the best teams are.
No.
So we have to go with the teams that earned it.
Not only the teams that earned it, and that's actually probably the best point, is that Alabama did not earn their way into the playoff. That's all there is to it. And even at times we've seen teams lose head to head, like Ohio State last year. You can argue that Ohio State was a better team than Penn State, and that's why the committee decided to choose them last year. And they lost head to head. So
yes, and like we've stated a number of times, I have empathy for Penn State fans and their argument, and it's rock solid. Big Ten champion and won the head-to-head. But at least there's a reasonable argument that Ohio State's full resume was better, and I believe it was better, even though I would have selected Penn State better, in that they beat Michigan, a top 10 team. Penn State got annihilated by Michigan. Ohio State had the Wisconsin win. Penn State won that game in the postseason, and then of course the Oklahoma win, a top 5 team against a Penn State, and only losing 1 time versus Penn State losing 2 times. So, okay. Unless you have anything else to say about this, I guess we've reached our conclusion here.
I still don't feel better. I'm still gonna watch.
You're gonna watch the playoffs.
I'm gonna watch all of it. I have to soak it all in. I'm not going to be happy about it. I'm not going to cheer for any of those teams. I can't even say I have a favorite in the top 4 at this point. But it's college football. So I'm going to tune in.
And I genuinely hope that the committee did not make this selection based on what happened versus Clemson last year. I can understand human nature wanting to do that. So any knucklehead fan that wants to say, I'm not selecting that team because they lost 31-0 last year, I get it. because that's human nature, thinking the same team's going to show up this year. But that's not how you should operate season to season. This is a new season. We base it on the results and the metrics this season.
Especially since it's a completely different team. Clemson is a completely different team than they were last year. So I agree. And there was a part of me immediately after that loss to Clemson last year that thought Ohio State just ruined any chance they have of getting into the playoff next year if it's close at all.
Yep. And you are right. You were right and you are right.
I don't
But
like
we could apply this. You don't like being right sometimes. Yeah, it's very rare, but
yes.
If the same measure would have been applied in 2015 of either argument that you select the best teams, regardless of what they've done, who they've beaten, just best teams, however that's interpreted, there's no doubt in my mind that Ohio State in 2015 was one of the best teams. That was an NFL team. That team was serious. And
literally then NFL team. And in a game, that loss to Michigan State wasn't brutal. It was a brutal day. It was a horrible coaching day. And it was an abomination. The entire loss. They lost to Michigan State's backup quarterback. Connor Cook was out, and they still didn't get it done. But it was a rough day. I mean, they definitely they fought and obviously lost at the last second to a Michigan State field goal. That's that stat that I don't love, but somehow love, where Michigan State beat Michigan and Ohio State with 0 time on the clock. They were never in the lead in either one of those games, which is college football.
And if anything, it was a brutal loss, but you talk about justifying a loss. You lost to a playoff team that won the Big Ten championship on the last play of the game. That was your one loss. And then this is the last thing I'm going to say, but it hits me as another connection, ironically, within the argument of these 4 years, that if you're going to say, I don't want to see this Ohio State team play Clemson again and get annihilated again, then why wouldn't you say in 2015, this is the same? And I know the personnel. This is pretty much outside of one of their top offensive linemen left, like a Taylor Decker, somebody, and Devin Smith. But outside of that, the defense was back. Everybody was back.
Joey Bosa, Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah. On and on and on. Well, that's the team that won the national championship last year. Why don't we bring them back? In 2015, they went 11-1 and lost by that much to a playoff team. Why don't we bring them back? Don't we want that team back in? If you're going to make the argument, we don't want the 2016 Buckeyes back in.
I don't have any justification. Can't argue with you on that whatsoever.
Man, the more I talk about this, the more I come up with more and you're supplying better points than I am. But
sorry, I told you it might make it worse.
So, in an era gone by, USC Ohio State would have been a magical matchup in postseason play for any Big Ten, Ohio State, Pac-12, USC fan to know that they were playing another one of these story traditions in college football. We're talking Ohio State football each and every week with Claire Crawford from the Ozone, and you can catch her show with Joe Dexter. Oh, hail no. And Claire, I was just mentioning, if you didn't hear me, that in an era gone by, it would have been magical to say Ohio State and USC are going to meet in the postseason. And that's all you would have need to know, that you're going to play USC. And that would have just been, you would have known it would have been in Pasadena with those beautiful rose decals on the field and the beautiful setting there in Southern California on January 1st. This one a little bit different, and with the playoff stealing all the thunder, how do you get excited for this one?
I am
get excited for this one?
I am actually more excited for this game than I thought I would be excited for a Buckeye Bowl game that was not a playoff. And part of it is because of the reasons that you mentioned before, because I'm a college football fan. It's a classic matchup. The series is close between the two, even though the Trojans are winning in the series. But the thing that makes me excited about this game is these are two teams with something to prove. These are two teams with a chip on their shoulder that got snubbed and want to send a message saying, this is why we should have been chosen. And for anything else other than to send their seniors out on the best possible note, I think that is probably the biggest message that these two teams can send to the committee.
So we've seen Urban Meyer a number of times throughout his career not play for national championships, but still post a very impressive bowl record. Clay Helton, very new to the scene, went to postseason play for the first time as a head coach on this level last season and won the Rose Bowl on the last play of the game in a very entertaining, high-scoring game against Penn State. So the motivation argument is always made in bowl games outside of the playoff, particularly of teams that have high aspirations and then aren't able to follow them through, and then they play in what could be considered a meaningless bowl game. So your selling point's great. Do you think Urban Meyer is going to be able to make the same sale to his team?
I don't think that's going to be like the prime resting place for where they need this motivation to be. I think it could be a big part. I'm not Urban Meyer. I don't know how he likes to motivate his team. But I will say when you start to look at these teams and the matchup on paper, which is how I forensically have to go back and study USC aside from watching film, is that this should be a game of the big play. What USC is giving up on the ground, they're giving up almost 160 yards per game. And we've seen a J.K. Dobbins that was the MVP of the Big Ten Championship and a Mike Weber with a 1-2 punch on the ground. Even though USC is proven to be very, very good in the red zone, they're giving up a lot of third downs, and Ohio State has been very efficient in that category. So I think as far as big plays go, with Sam Darnold being a very dynamic, very exciting player to watch for USC, JT Barrett, this is his very last game, I think. I mean, does he have somehow some random eligibility that he's not telling us all about? But definitely it's going to be, I think, a game where we could see some exciting back and forth happen.
After the disappointing game against Oklahoma, Urban Meyer was met with these comments concerning JT Barrett and possibly making a quarterback change, and then it reared its ugly head again, even after the outstanding comeback against Penn State, when the very next week they go to Iowa City and JT throws 4 interceptions. And then considering his health coming out of the Michigan game and going into the Big Ten championship game, do you think that JT's career has been very much compromised in the view of most fans? That's what I see on social media, that there's not a high level of appreciation. There are always going to be critics. Unless you win the national championship, there are going to be critics. And I just hear a lot of comments made that can't wait to see this guy go.
Right.
Haskins in there.
I think JT Barrett could get a Heisman Trophy, get his PhD in the 5 years that he was there. I think JT Barrett could be, he is the most decorated Ohio State quarterback of all time. I think JT Barrett could win a national championship. He did. Big Ten championship. He did and did. JT Barrett can do all that. And for some reason, it is never going to be good enough for some fans. I don't know whether it's because he's not very flashy. I don't know whether it's because he's not been super consistent, but you can't take away what JT Barrett has done for this team. It cannot be disputed. The the combination that we're going to see, the two quarterbacks between Ohio State and USC, it's JT Barrett and Sam Darnold. Again, it's not going to be super flashy, but I think this is absolutely going to be one for the ages. And no, I don't think there's anybody that wanted JT Barrett to not play in the Big Ten championship. I don't think that you're going to change their mind. There's nothing he can do in this game to change their minds at this point.
Talking Ohio State football with Claire Crawford. Join her and her co-host, Joe Dexter, on Oh Hail No. You can catch it on theozone.net each and every week. When does that become public for all of us, Claire? When do you typically record?
I'm sorry, I missed the last part. You broke up.
When do you typically record with Joe?
Joe and I need to get together badly. Right now, it is a bookmark. He is a very busy guy with two beautiful young daughters. So Joe and I still have yet to put together a Ohio State USC prediction show. I miss my pal like crazy. He is the well, I won't say he's the peanut butter to my jelly, because I think I might actually be made of peanut butter, but we are definitely a dynamic duo. So if you get the chance to see any of our older episodes, feel free. It's mostly comedy and food and a little bit of college football.
So the comment about the peanut butter, is that based on how much peanut butter you consume?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a problem. I eat a lot of peanut butter.
Well, it's high in protein.
It is.
We can look at the benefits.
It is.
All right. So we've got about close to a month to dive into this one. So we will do so in future weeks. USC, Ohio State, a lot of big time talent on both sides going at it. And we will dive into the history. 7 straight for the Trojans. So there's not been a lot of good history for the Buckeyes in recent years, meaning recent 40 years in this kind of cross-country rivalry of sorts that of years gone by, with those being the premier programs in the Pac-12 or the Pac-10 at the time, or the Pac-8 at one time, and the Big Ten. All right, Claire, appreciate you dropping by as well, and providing me with even more fodder for the College Football Playoff Committee.
I apologize, but I also appreciate it, because I don't know if I feel any better. I'm just going to be over here sipping my tea, as they say, while I watch, hopefully, the best team win the national championship.
All right, Claire, you have a good night. I appreciate it.